Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're diving into a highly sensitive, deeply harrowing real-life case study of domestic violence. This is actually drawn from a recent anonymous confession, and it highlights something much bigger than just an individual tragedy. It exposes a massive, systemic, societal failure. We're going to carefully map out the anatomy of this abuse, look at the psychology of the environment it creates, and finally chart a roadmap for breaking free. It's definitely a heavy topic, but it's an absolutely crucial one for us to understand structurally. Just listen to this for a second. I would wear foundation to school to hide the blue bruises on my face. Now, that is not from some movie script. That is the visceral, horrifying reality of an anonymous 18-year-old girl describing her childhood. I mean, just imagine being a kid, sitting in a classroom and having your classmates constantly asking why you have blue marks all over your face. For her, that was just everyday normal.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. A harrowing anonymous confession. Growing up in a war zone.
So to understand how a child even gets to that horrific point, we really have to look at the household ecosystem she was growing up in. From the literal moment she gained consciousness, her home was essentially a war zone. It was totally normalized by extreme physical violence and financial instability. But there was this glaring, disturbing disparity in how the abuse was dished out. The daughter, our anonymous confessor, was beaten mercilessly for the tiniest of mistakes. Meanwhile, her younger brother? Completely spared. The source notes the underlying assumption here. He was spared simply because he was a boy. You can imagine how this stark gender disparity within the exact same house adds this massive layer of psychological trauma, establishing super early on this dangerous hierarchy of who actually deserves physical safety.
This brings us to Part 2, the breaking point, at age 18.
So this dynamic of living in constant, paralyzing fear continued for years. But you know, every pressure cooker eventually hits its absolute limit. And for this young woman, that limit came when she turned 18. The whole confrontation actually started over something incredibly minor. Her father slapped her hard across the face, and then, completely escalating the situation, he came at her with a stick to beat her. But this time, she didn't just brace for the impact. There happened to be a knife lying nearby, and in a pure, desperate act of self-preservation and self-defense, she picked it up. She explained that her goal was solely to scare him, just warning him that if he came one step closer, things were not going to end well.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the psychological shift that happened the very second she raised that weapon. Her father actually took 2 steps back. He was in absolute shock. The source material uses this exact moment to define the psychology of a bully. Abusers in these types of scenarios rely entirely on the perceived weakness and submission of their victims. So when they're suddenly challenged with an equal or greater threat of force, the illusion of their absolute power just shatters. In that moment, the 18-year-old realized a pretty dark truth. Her world was one that only crushes the weak. The moment she finally showed strength, he backed down.
Moving into Part 3, the cycle of relapse, the illusion of peace. And this brilliantly illustrates that standing up to an abuser rarely results in a clean, immediate resolution. What followed was a brief 2-year pause in the physical violence, simply because she had drawn a hard boundary. But abusers, well, they often just change tactics. He replaced the physical violence with intense character assassination among their relatives. It was a total illusion of peace. You can really see how this traps victims in an inescapable loop. Starts in childhood, escalates at 18, buys temporary peace, but then comes the lockdown, culminating in a brutal public attack in the present day. Let's zoom in on those last 2 events.
So during the lockdown, the father relapsed hard into violence. He attacked the mother and actually started choking her. The daughter begged him to stop, and when he wouldn't listen, she literally had to physically push him away just to save her mom's life. The mother, tragically, fell into severe depression after this. And then, the abuse spilled right out into the streets. In a sudden fit of rage, the father pushed the daughter off a moving bike in public. Both her legs were bleeding, and as he came at her to continue the beating right there on the street, crowds of strangers actually had to step in and intervene to save her. She had to flee in a rickshaw, utterly humiliated and physically broken.
Which leads us to Part 4, Society's Silent Complicity, Failing the Victims.
Honestly, this brings us to the most infuriating part of this entire case study, because it's not just about one violent man. It is about the societal ecosystem that just sits back and allows this abuse to continue unchecked. The source material poses this incredibly powerful rhetorical question. Where are the walis, the male guardians, when the husband turns out to be an animal? You see, in this cultural context, a male guardian is required to be present at the marriage specifically to ensure the bride's safety and well-being. But the commentator asks a very valid question. Why do all these fathers and brothers just disappear after the wedding day? If a husband turns out to be abusive, why aren't these guardians standing by the woman, demanding answers, and actually protecting her?
Well, instead of protection, victims are often met with just one single loaded word, sabr, which means patience. The source highlights that whenever this bruised mother would flee to her own maternal family's house, her family would literally just tell her to have patience. They would force her to forgive the father and go right back to settle her home. They weaponize this concept of patience to force victims back into incredibly dangerous, abusive environments, effectively sealing them inside a torture chamber, all under the guise of just keeping the family together.
And what exactly happens to the kids who grow up watching this? The source explicitly refers to this environment as a home wrestling match. Children who are witnessing constant domestic violence suffer severe psychological impacts. We're talking negative brain development. They spend their formative years living in a state of constant paralyzing fear. And the worst part? Without intervention, they are at a massive risk of growing up and becoming abusers themselves. The cycle just feeds itself.
Finally, Part 5, the ultimate escape plan, breaking free.
So what is the actual solution here? A victim in this situation is desperate for a way out, and the source actually provides a definitive, structured plan for exactly that. But before we get to the steps, we need to impartially reflect on the deeply tragic nuance of her actions. The commentator notes that raising a weapon against a parent is culturally taboo and fundamentally wrong. I mean, a child should never be put in a position where they have to threaten a parent. But the analysis carefully balances this by recognizing that this situation entirely forced her hand. It was pure self-preservation. When society and your family completely fail to protect you, your basic survival instincts have to take over.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an actionable plan. Step 1 is absolutely the most critical. Achieve financial independence. You have to gain skills, whether quietly or openly, no matter your age. Step 2, if it's at all possible and safe, is to seek professional counseling for the abuser, though obviously, safety always comes first. And Step 3, the ultimate goal, relocate the mother and the siblings to a safe, comfortable place far away from the abuser.
So the crucial point is embedded right here in this quote from the source's commentary. Every human becomes a doormat here simply because they don't have money. Financial independence is the ultimate key, guys. When victims aren't equipped with an education or career skills, they physically cannot pull themselves out of the gutter when they fall into these abusive traps. Money provides choices. Money provides an exit door.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. The source leaves us with this stark, super provocative question. Will society continue to raise girls without making them independent? Basically keeping them trapped like chickens in a drum, just waiting to be handed off to abusers? Or will we step up, start educating them, empowering them to build careers, and ensure they actually have the financial footing to stand on their own 2 feet if they ever need to? It's a question that demands a real change in how we raise the next generation. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured look at such a difficult topic has given you a clearer understanding of both the personal and societal mechanics behind this issue. See you next time.